Hi, it's Vera. Welcome to episode 8 of the PL Pod. I had a few ideas for this podcast, but in the end they all sounded boring, so I tossed them aside and made a decision to start again. I'm not going to talk about the weather. We all know the situation the minute we look out the window. I'm not going to talk about the pandemic. Nobody wants to be reminded or even hear the word. I think we all know that it will pass, and we'll get there when we get there. And there are encouraging pieces of news, so be hopeful. Don't be a COVIDiot. Protect yourself and protect others. I can't sing for you. That would be grossly unfair, although I do like to sing for myself. And as you can see, the removal of all these topics narrows the field of my podcast considerably. In a phone conversation with my writer friend Betty, I was talking about my struggle, and she said, "Not everyone wants to be taught something," which suggests you want to be entertained. Well, to quote a moderator at a workshop I was in when his system crashed and he lost all video, yikes. Then I thought about a thing I saw on Twitter, and the thing on Twitter said that Heinz will start making ketchup in Canada again. Now, that won't help Leamington, but it will bring approximately 30 jobs to Montreal. So never let it be said that the dollar doesn't talk. When Heinz pulled out of Leamington in, I think, 2014, the shift to French's ketchup caused their sales to spike and Heinz to drop. So, dollars. Now back to the theory that you would like to be entertained. I have a ketchup-appropriate story that I will read to you now because of this success of the dollar. It was published in the Mid-North Monitor when I was writing a weekly column for the Sun newspaper chain. It's called Ketchup Tales, and it goes like this. Ketchup, where to begin? With my friend Audrey, who was horrified when her niece's husband sat down and slathered the Thanksgiving turkey with ketchup. Audrey's feeling was, if all you wanted to taste was ketchup, why buy a quality bird, season it to perfection, and cook it for hours and hours to golden turkey perfection? If all you wanted was ketchup, then buy a pack of sausages. I didn't tell her then that I regularly encounter this ketchup travesty, but I do. Maybe I should begin to entertain you with my sister's friend who took one look at her slice of famous pumpkin pie and added, "You guessed it, ketchup." My sister was somewhat traumatized, and when we discussed this wacky behavior, we shuddered in unison, she on her coast and me in the center of Ontario. Of course, this is the same sister who wanted to know if there was any movement in the ketchup bottle, held it up to her eye for a squint, and just in time to get a gob in the eyeball. Thankfully, that's not something we ever saw happen twice. And in fairness, she was a kid. And if we're going to talk about ketchup use, we can also throw in the egg thing, the potato thing, the fried chicken thing, and finally, the meat pie thing, which is what inspired me to jot down this tale. Let me set the scene. I am sitting at the table with my husband and daughter, and the food has been set on the table. We start with a nice bowl of homemade soup, and when our bowls are empty, we move along to the meat pie and vegetable portion. At this point, Ralph gets up and goes to the refrigerator where he hauls out the ketchup and brings it to the table, and I do mean haul. Last time we went to the grocery store, he purchased the biggest bottle of ketchup available. A bottle so big it comes with detailed instructions on it, how to make it fit inside your refrigerator. He strong-armed the bottle into the air and laid down a healthy squirt on his meat pie. He set down the bottle and used his fork to spread the red all over the entire top crust. He sighed in contentment. Our girl, not to be outdone in the ketchup department, reached for the ketchup bottle. After a couple of false starts, she got the bottle high enough in the air to load up. When she was done, she looked inquiring at me, but I chose to pass. She set down the behemoth and looked at her dad, and with a grin said, "Are you sure you have enough ketchup?" Then I said to her, "Hey, Dad can't eat dinner without ketchup. We ran out a week ago, remember, and he had to make that emergency run to the convenience store." We might have shared a smile at this point because we both know it was true. Her father, my husband, must have been feeling that his favorite condiment was under attack because he began a somewhat emotional defense of the giant ketchup bottle. He said this bottle, pointing to the gargantuan bottle of ketchup with how-to refrigerator instructions on the side, was the same price as a small one from the convenience store. Furthering his defense of tomato puree and tomatoes in general, he said, "Ketchup is just tomatoes. Using ketchup is no different than if you had a slice of tomato on top of your pie." At this point, he settled down, picked up his fork, and began to eat, as we all did. And so ends the ketchup tale. I hope you were entertained. I was. I don't think it's unfortunate that I have no ketchup poetry, although I did have a couple of tomato-based haiku. Yuck, yuck, did you see what I did there? But even though I did a search, I couldn't locate either poem that I know I have in my massive file of haiku and senryu. That's okay, I'll find it for next time. I do have other poems that I enjoyed writing that are food or garden related. First, I'd like to read Life Lessons with Fruit, about my brother and my daughter when she was young and he was being somewhat young in his thinking. Life Lessons with Fruit. He let her follow him up and down rows of potatoes, explained patiently to her why ladybugs were not welcome. He gave her the names of all his green friends, showed her off to the neighbors, gave them her name like ownership, like love. He'd pick a ripe, juicy raspberry, hold that deep red fruit out to her for its sweetness, and then, because it was his way, pick a tart, pale gooseberry to offer next. When her face reflected sour gooseberry on taste buds, he would laugh at his harmless mischief and say, "That's life. Sweet and bitter, bitter and sweet." That's kind of my philosophy too. Next, I'd like to read you You Ought, which explains itself and is somewhat more diverse in its meaning now, what with gentrification of property in older established neighborhoods, both here in Greater Sudbury and in other centers as well. These poems were originally published in Manitoulin Morsels, a book put out by the collective of the Manitoulin Writers Circle, and hopefully next year we will get back to it. You Ought. After the annual visit to Major Street in Toronto, Mum would laugh at the ingenious gardening wizard who was her sister. "She's filled every corner, every space in the courtyard that's 10 by 10. Tomatoes, peppers, a cucumber patch, beans strung up the fence. You ought to see it." Mum's Manitoulin garden, 100 feet deep, 25 wide, had soil as black as 100 years of manure could make it. Mom's garden produced unblemished potatoes, sweet pie pumpkins, tomatoes, and onions, carrots as long and straight as rulers, apple trees, gooseberry bushes, raspberry canes, and rhubarb formed its border. You ought to have seen it. The new owner brought in a bulldozer that revved and roared and pushed. In a day, he raised the site. Apple blossom, gooseberry, blackberry bushes, rhubarb and raspberry canes fell by the blade. His lawn is lush and thick and as green as 100 years of manure can make it. He laid sod over the garden. You ought to see it. Thank you. Once again, we are at the end of my podcast. This 10 minutes goes very quickly, and yet seems to take forever for me to do. Thanks for listening. You know what I always say? Write something. It feels good. Until next time, bye.